Okay. Okay. Um, Unfortunately, this is what happened last time when I ran the in-person class. As soon as I started, I got so nervous that I felt almost like I was going to black out. But um, anyway, apparently that's just what happens. Um, it made it a bit hard because, you know, this is the kind of thing where you want your brain to be functioning. And when it's flooded with stress hormones uh, from stage fright, it it doesn't function that well. And you think you've memorized your notes, but all of a sudden you can't remember your own name, and that's just how it goes, I suppose. But I remembered a quote from my favorite guy. Well, I can't say that. I got a few favorite guys, but a quote from one of my favorite guys, G.K. Chesterton, that if a thing is worth doing, it's worth doing badly. And um, so, yeah, I'm gonna keep, I'm gonna try and present this analysis of the Gospel of St. Luke. And I'm gonna try and show up authentically because there's no other way for me to show up. Um, I am severely, severely underqualified to do this, and perhaps it is far too ambitious and too bold a thing to pursue pursue um, for me. But I also remembered that the you know the people that Christ chose were uneducated fishermen, and they went on to do great things for him. And I'm not an uneducated fisherman, but I am a not very highly educated uh, remedial massage therapist. This is, yeah. Um, so I just have to show up as I am authentically, which is what you're seeing. Um, Feeling terribly nervous, uh, very not confident, and unsure of why I'm even doing this. I don't know, to be honest. But we'll just blame Evangelique, gorgeous Filipina, for putting the idea in my head. This is your fault, Evangelique, if you're watching. Um, I wrote something at the top of my notes. I hope this is even working and you can hear me. That the more you love, the more you know about God, the more you love Him. the more you the more you learn about God, the more you love him. And I think I wrote that last night because I was feeling really unsure of why I was doing this. And I just felt like this should be done by someone else, um, because I can't do it. I don't I don't know enough. I'm too nervous. I'm too un- unskilled, unqualified. But I uh, I want I want other people to learn about God, because sometimes it's hard to love God. Um, it's hard to it's hard to you know we're supposed to love God. If you're not Catholic or Christian, just ignore this part. We'll get into the textual analysis part. This is just a little spiritual part, which just ignore it if you're not Christian or Catholic, which is the same thing. But it's hard to love something or someone that you don't know anything about. And the more I learn about God, the more I just cannot help but have this love, devotion, wonder about how, like, it's hard not to just sit in awe and just like have your jaw, like, you know. So I want other people to be able to learn these things, and I think we're in a um, society in these days that doesn't want us to learn very much, wants us to be very taken up with our um, wage slave jobs, and when we're not doing that, whatever um, brain rot is on TikTok for the younger generations anyway. And when we're not doing that, you know, just try to try to see, I'm not very good at talking either, so it makes it hard. I think you get the general idea. We're not encouraged to learn history. We're not encouraged to think critically. We're not encouraged to, um, yeah, you get the idea. And I want people to learn who God is, and I want people to learn what the Bible says, because it's actually it's a historical document, which is really cool. Um, and then judge for yourselves whether you think it has any merit or not. All right, so I don't want to just go on and on, but what I want to say is, um, when I ran the Bible study, the in-person Bible study, which was supposed to be live streamed, but it was kind of a blessing in disguise that the live stream didn't work, because I was absolutely terrified, and the added pressure of a live stream may have pushed me over the edge. I may have combusted or blacked out and just flopped on the floor. I think I tried to show up confidently and pretend I was confident, but I wasn't. And that, I think, made it worse. So I have to show up authentically as who I am, which is just a neurodiverse, nervous weirdo. That's who I am. Sorry. Um, wish I could be something more, yeah, more better, for lack of proper English, but this is who I am. So, all right. And unfortunately, no matter how hard no matter how hard I try to memorize my notes, I get so nervous that I can't remember what I had for breakfast, which is good because I don't eat breakfast. So I unfortunately have to rely on my notes a lot. So it may seem at times like I'm reading, um, because I am. I may get better at this as time goes on. I have a dog and he just barked. I'm sorry. I hope he doesn't do that a lot. Okay, hopefully all of that was on mute. So I've got my coffee. Hopefully that slurp wasn't super loud and horrible in the mic. Let's let's begin. So according to early Catholic tradition, St. Luke, the evangelist, was a Gentile Greek physician from Antioch. He would have been highly educated. A classical education during this time period would have involved learning art, music, philosophy, and history, which is vastly different from how we educate physicians to be physicians these days. So it was a more, I think, a really interesting way of education. It was more integrated with everything else in life. So they didn't just learn uh, pharmacology and anatomy and disease. They learned a more broad specialties. Very good. I think it's very good. St. Luke was a missionary companion to St. Paul. This is inferred famously by the use of we instead of I or they in the book of Acts. So when during the book of Acts, a lot of it is written with first person I, and then St. Paul changes to we. This indicates this is indicating that he was with Paul, St. Paul, and St. Paul affectionately refers to St. Luke in Scripture as our beloved physician, which is sweet. It kind of hints at that kind of friendship like we see in between between men in the Lord of the Rings that you just don't see in this day and age because I don't know, men are scared of seeming gay, I guess. Um, like it's gay to have fellowship and mateship and tell your friends you love them. That's just my take on it. But St. Paul referred to St. Luke as our beloved physician, and I think that's really sweet. I did want this to be more of a scholarly study rather than a spiritual study, but I'm realizing more and more that it's going to be kind of girly coded, not girly coded, but I, it's going to, everything's going to be sort of seen that I deliver is going to be seen through my lens. And I'm the kind of person that would read something like St. Paul refers to St. Luke as our beloved physician and think, oh, that's so sweet and wholesome and lovely. And a someone else, maybe a man, might not think it like that. So going to try and keep things objective and scholarly, even though I'm not a scholar, but I'm using the sources from scholars, so it will still be scholarly, but um, I can't help but like putting my own uh, perspective, like showing my perspective on things, which is going to be, it's going to be like how I see things. Apologies for rambling and not making sense. Hopefully, I will get better. Anything worth doing, it's worth doing badly. G.K. Chesterton said, and he's a good guy. So Luke joined Paul's travels at some point during Paul's missionary journeys, as indicated by the we passages. He also remained by Paul's side when the other disciples left him during Paul's imprisonment in Rome. Some scholars say under Emperor Nero. And Paul wrote to Timothy right before Paul was killed, martyred, that only Luke is with me, which is kind of sad. But it just shows how loyal he was, how loyal Luke was, and that they were quite close. Luke is the inspired author of the third gospel and the book of Acts of the Apostles. Catholic tradition honors Luke among the evangelists and Paul's companions rather than among the 12 apostles. So we distinguish the 12 apostles from other major figures that were like called evangelists or companions. Luke is not one of the 12, as far as we can deduce. Interesting word choice. Pardon me. Luke presents himself as writing using information received from those who were eyewitnesses from the beginning. Therefore, it's inferred that he did not personally witness Jesus' earthly ministry. So he writes using information received, not using information that he viewed firsthand. Therefore, he is a second-generation Christian historian who gathered first-hand testimonies from eyewitnesses. Catholic tradition commonly holds that Mary was the ultimate source for Luke's material regarding the birth of Jesus. So it is widely held in Eastern Orthodox tradition and in the Western Catholic tradition that Luke spoke with the Blessed Mother Mary and got the information that he used to write about the Immaculate Conception and the Nativity. I didn't include this in the notes because it was really convoluted and hard to verify, and there was so many different opinions, and some people said this is stupid, this is ridiculous. I'm paraphrasing. And some people said this definitely happened. But there is a icon called the Black Madonna, and it's the Black Madonna of, I wish I could pronounce this word. The Black Madonna of Chenstohova. The Black Madonna of Chenstohova. It's Polish. It's in Poland. And it is There's a tradition that St. Luke painted it. All right, let me share my screen, which apparently I can do. Oh, yeah, there we go. So get closer. Oh, so this is the icon of the Black Madonna. I think it's in the Vatican now. Don't quote me on that. But so there's in the Eastern Orthodox tradition and in the Western tradition, there's I think what you would call a pious legend that St. Luke actually painted this. There was a bit of talk that it was painted on a wax tablet. I don't think that was verifiable. There was also a uh, legend, which turned out, I think, to have come about in the 13th century medieval Europe, that St. Luke painted it on the Blessed Virgin's dining table while he was talking to her, which I thought was really sweet. But apparently, that is pretty, yeah, that was medieval talk, unfortunately, because that's a really lovely story. Um, but yeah, so the tradition in the Eastern Orthodox, um, they really strongly believe that St. Luke painted this. And then there's like in the West, the Catholic Church, we're always a little bit more. Uh, we're very hard on legends and traditions. We really like the church never wants to say anything unless it has really good evidence of it. Even the Shroud of Turin, which has that's a whole nother thing. Um, the church doesn't say anything, uh, doesn't say that it's definitely the Shroud of Christ, even though the yeah, I won't go into it, but look into it. There's a really good book about it. Anyway, no, I'm not going on a tangent. So there's a tradition that Luke painted that Black Madonna um, icon, and we can't verify it, but I personally think he may have, because the Eastern Christians are very good at keeping tradition, and when they start writing down oral tradition, it's yeah. So I think the 6th century was when we the first written traditions we have for Luke being the church's first iconographer. But the 6th century was when, like, that's our earliest surviving written evidence of it being an oral tradition. And things can happen with Chinese whispers and so, but yeah. Anyway, sorry about that ramble. So Luke is traditionally described as a Greek-speaking non-Jew. St. Paul separates him from the other companions that he refers to as of the circumcision, which is an interesting way to refer to his companions. But anyway, so Luke is considered one of the Gentile contributors to the New Testament, and so he would have come from a pagan family, um, of, of of Greek um, descent in Antioch, and converted. Luke did anyway. I wonder what his family thought. Imagine he would have converted them. If he's anything like me, who wants to convert everybody. secretly. No, maybe, but we respect everyone's free will to live their lives exactly as they want. But I do want to tell you about the Catholic faith because it's very interesting. Oh man. Okay, so according to early and widespread tradition, Luke was unmarried and was devoted to the service of the gospel. And we can infer, we don't have evidence, but it can be inferred that he was lived a life of chastity and celibacy and just worked for the gospel. After Paul's martyrdom in Rome, we have no certain knowledge, but later tradition says that Luke preached in various regions of the Mediterranean, including Greece, Libya, and Egypt. Later traditions recount preaching in other various areas of the Mediterranean, like Dalmatia, Italy, and Macedonia. There's variation on how long he lived. There is a tradition that gives 74 years of age and another that gives 84 years of age. So in the Eastern Orthodox patristic tradition, there is a lot of more detail that they like to give stock to. So I'm going to just tell you about that, but just keep in mind this is not verified by Rome. Rome is a little bit more like, we're not sure. But this is the patristic tradition that I'll tell you about now. And I'll keep saying that it's according to Eastern Orthodox tradition because I just want to make sure that everybody knows that this isn't verified by Rome, but it's So according to the Orthodox tradition, Luke did not flee Rome immediately after Paul's death. Instead, he remained in Italy to fortify the Roman Church. From Italy, he traveled across the Adriatic Sea into Dalmatia, which is modern-day Croatia, and Macedonia, which is modern-day northern Greece. According to pious tradition in the East, he went and visited the local churches that he and Paul had co-founded, ordaining new priests and deacons to solidify the apostolic succession. In the Great Synaxarion, which is the Eastern Orthodox collection of liturgical biographies, they say that Luke then sailed south into North Africa, where he was evangelizing and converting pagan tribes in Libya. He then traveled into Egypt, past Alexandria, and down to Thebaid, which is the Upper Egyptian desert. This account also credits Luke directly with consecrating Saint Abiel, who became the second bishop of Alexandria following the martyrdom of St. Mark. The Roman Catholic Church history doesn't officially claim or confirm this Egyptian lineage or the consecration of St. Abiel, but it is held in the Orthodox tradition. So, for lack of a better term, it can be taken with a grain of salt, but the East are very good at keeping tradition. So, it's sort of perhaps, probably, this is what he did, but we don't know for sure. After this, according to the Orthodox tradition, Luke returned to Greece in his later years and settled in the inland region of Boeotia and became the Bishop of Thebes. Again, we don't know this for sure we don't say it's for sure in the Catholic Church, but sorry, I just knocked my mic. But is my sound back? Oh gosh. Lucky my dad, oh, lucky my dad was watching. Okay. Now I'm more nervous because someone is actually watching. But it's just my dad, so that's okay. So yeah, so these people, the people who were upset at St. Luke, they incited a mob, and the Eastern Orthodox say that they incited a mob, they arrested him, he was severely tortured, flayed alive, and crucified on a wild olive tree in Thebes. So that is pretty nasty. And generally, when there's a lot of details like that, it might be inferred that it was a later tradition, not an early tradition. But that's just what the Eastern Orthodox say, which is interesting to note. But the West says that he died peacefully, and perhaps we'll never know in this life. So the Eastern Orthodox hagiographical tradition preserves a martyr legend with these details, but it is not historically certain, and Catholic sources treat martyrdom as doubtful and controverted. They treat a peaceful death as more likely, but martyrdom is debated, and it's open to debate. The West don't really confirm or deny, they just neutral. Okay, so St. Luke's symbol is the symbol of the winged ox, which I have a picture of. Okay, share my screen. Nope. Why that did not work? Oops. Okay, hang on. Dead air is not good. Sorry about that. All right. The winged ox. There we go. The winged ox symbol of St. Luke, as it's most commonly seen. The first time I came across this symbol, I was at a market in Castlemaine with my dad, and I was just like, "Wow, that looks really cool." It was printed on a paper bag that I brought a bag of lemons in, and I was still learning about the saints, and St. Luke hadn't really been on my radar that much. And then I learnt that he's the patron saint of physicians and artists, which I really liked because I'm not a physician. And I said this in the Bible study. I said, "Yeah, I really like him because he's the patron saint of physicians, and I'm not a physician, but I'm a remedial massage therapist, and I've just started studying a Bachelor of Naturopathy." And one of the ladies in the Bible study, bless her, she said, "I think physicians sort of try to distance themselves from naturopaths." And it was like a bit of a smackdown. Um, which I really appreciated because I love being humbled. And yeah, but we don't have a specific patron saint for remedial massage therapists who are just started studying a Bachelor of Naturopathy. So we refer to the beloved physician, St. Luke, who takes us on, I suppose, because we don't have a specific saint for that specific set of skills, I guess. Um, so yeah, he's the patron saint of people who work with people who are in pain and in that kind of general health care kind of setting. An artist, and I'm not an artist either, but I like to draw. So that was an interesting little discovery for me. I felt like St. Luke was like, "Hey, I'm your guy." And I do ask him for intercession with my work all the time, and I think he's helped me a lot. So that's his symbol, and it's quite cool. Um, so uh, the other gospel writers have their own symbols as well, and um, just a little bit on them. So St. Matthew has the symbol of the man, of the creature with the face of a man. Um, Generally, the patristic tradition, the early church fathers gave him this symbol because his gospel begins with human genealogy of Jesus Christ and is focused on Christ's human nature. So he was given this kind of symbol. St. Mark received the symbol of the lion, and this is the early church fathers say they gave him this symbol because it begins in the wilderness with John the Baptist crying out, and they likened this crying out with the voice of a lion roaring in the desert. They gave St. John the symbol of the eagle because um, his gospel is very lofty and high. It focuses on high Christology, which sort of soars above um, earthly things. So they gave him the symbol of the eagle, and they gave St. Luke the symbol of the ox, because in Christian, um, because St. Luke's gospel begins in the holy place of the temple in Jerusalem, where the priest Zechariah is offering incense, and we'll get into that soon, hopefully, if I can, get moving. But gives the symbol of the ox because he's given the symbol of the ox because it starts in the temple where the ox is traditionally very commonly sacrificed. So, and his gospel also focuses on Christ's sacrifice on the cross and Christ being the ultimate sacrifice. So Christ replaces the old animal sacrifices. So because St. Luke's gospel focuses on this, he gets the symbol of the ox, which is, I think it's a really nice symbol. I like it a lot because I actually I have a dairy cow, so I'm quite fond of cows. So I like the symbol of the ox, and the winged ox is pretty cool. It's a cool symbol. So as I said a little bit earlier, St. Luke is the patron of physicians, surgeons, and artists, and his liturgical feast day is on October 18th in most Western calendars. Okay. Just going to. Oh no, I'm out of coffee. That is not good. Not good at all. Anyway, let's see how we go. So beginning with the dedication to Theophilus, we'll be starting. I'm using the Revised Standard Version Catholic Edition translation. So that's the translation that I've got, is the Revised Standard Version Catholic Edition. The Ignatius Catholic Study Bible uses the Revised Standard Version. This is the Ignatius Catholic Study Bible. It's gigantic. We'll be using that a lot too. But so, verse 1. Inasmuch as many have taken in hand to set in order a narrative of those things which have been fulfilled among us, just as those who from the beginning were eyewitnesses and ministers of the word delivered them to us, it seemed good to me also, having had perfect understanding of all things from the very first, to write to you an orderly account, most excellent Theophilus, that you may know the certainty of those things which you were instructed. I'd just like to get myself a pencil. Okay, so St. Luke is writing for Theophilus. We can most likely understand that he was a wealthy Roman official, or benefactor of St. Luke. According to biblical scholars and historians, Theophilus was very likely, paying for this writing to be composed, which was a very expensive process and would have been written on long physical scrolls. It could be like feet and feet and feet and feet long, which is pretty cool. Authors in this time of the Greco-Roman world almost always relied on wealthy sponsors or patrons to cover the cost of research, writing materials, and the creation of multiple copies for distribution. To give you an idea of how expensive it was, if you were a Christian living in the 1st century and wanted a copy of the Book of Romans on a scroll, it would cost about the equivalent in Australian dollars, when adjusting for modern wages, around $1,300 to $3,500. This kind of currency and conversion and understanding came from New Testament scholar Randolph Richards, if you'd like to look into that. So Luke and the Acts of the Apostles are 2 long books. If you put them together, they make up more than a quarter of the New Testament. If going by length, as in words written, St. Luke wrote more of the New Testament than anyone else. Counting by books, St. Luke wrote more, but by length and words, St. Luke wrote the most. Let's take a drink of water. St. Luke presents his book as a history as a result of research. He went out and found eyewitnesses, consulted other documents that other people had written about what Jesus had said and did, and he brings it all together for Theophilus as a historical account of Christ, his life, death, resurrection, ascension, and then Acts of the Apostles, which picks up after the ascension and goes on from there. So looking at verse 4, that you may know the certainty of those things which you were instructed. Um, so from this, it appears that Theophilus is a convert to Christianity as he has been instructed in the faith. So he wasn't someone who was with Christ when he was alive. Um, and it appears that Theophilus commissioned this work that St. Luke is writing so he can really have the whole story since he has the means to do so. And you can imagine, personally for me, if I was a first century wealthy individual and I had been told these things about Christ and I was thinking, wow, like this guy really sounds like the Son of God. I think I'm gonna believe this stuff and leave my pagan beliefs in yesterday and, you know, become a Christian. And he's thinking, I really wish I had like everything that happened in like a book set out so I could really know for sure and have confidence in this new belief I have. Um, I wish I could pay a guy to research all this and put it in a book for me. That's what I would do, and it appears that's what Theophilus did because he had a bit of money, and we can benefit from him putting all that, from him paying St. Luke to do that. So, verse 2, just as those who from the beginning were eyewitnesses and ministers of the word delivered them to us. Just as those who from the beginning were eyewitnesses and ministers of the word delivered them to us. So, Luke is identifying himself as a second generation Christian. The apostles were eyewitnesses and they received these things from Christ himself and they handed them on to others. St. Luke is identifying himself as one of those people that these things were handed down to. Just looking at verse 1 again. Inasmuch as many have taken in hand to set in order a narrative of those things which were fulfilled among us. Inasmuch as many have taken in hand. We don't know who the many is, but this is where we get the idea that he consulted multiple sources. The many, we believe, or we think, we understand, refer to earlier, now lost oral tradition or written Christian histories. Scholars generally agree that this shows Luke consulted and synthesized multiple sources, multiple existing sources to compile his own comprehensive, orderly account. So that's it for a bit of a breakdown of the dedication to Theophilus. And Theophilus, actually, let me just double check what I think I'm about to say. Yeah, so Theophilus, that name means friend of God or loved by God or lover of God. So, cool name and fun to say. Theophilus. All right. So, getting on to the next paragraph, John's birth announced to Zacharias. There was in the days of Herod, the king of Judea, a certain priest. No, let me start again. There was in the days of Herod, the king of Judea, a certain priest named Zacharias, of the division of Abijah. His wife was of the daughters of Aaron, and her name was Elizabeth. And they were both righteous before God, walking in all the commandments and ordinances of the Lord blameless. But they had no child because Elizabeth was barren, and they were both well advanced in years. So, right off the bat, we have a time marker, which is in the days of Herod, king of Judea. Because it says Herod, the king of Judea, we know that this was Herod the Great. So this is telling us when this happened, which is important because it shows us that St. Luke is telling us a history. He's not telling us a mythology or a folk tale or a parable. He wants us to know he's telling us a history of things that happened in a particular time in a particular place. A certain priest named Zacharias, so I'm finishing verse 5. A certain priest named Zacharias of the division of Abijah, don't know how to pronounce that. His wife was of the daughters of Aaron, and her name was Elizabeth. So our first characters in this history are introduced, Zacharias and Elizabeth. So the priests in the ancient Near East, they cast lots to determine who would serve the priestly duties on any given day, and this particular day, the lot fell to Zacharias. So sorry about the dead air again, but I just want to get a image for us about what it may have looked like when Zacharias was serving his priestly duties in the temple. All right, I'm going to share it. I just need to take a break, a bathroom break, while you have a look at that. Okay, so we're in, where were we? So the lot fell to Zacharias, which was a pretty low chance that he would be chosen for that. There were roughly between 18,000 and 20,000 priests in Israel, divided into 24 distinct divisions. And each division only served in the temple in Jerusalem for 1 week at a time, twice a year. So there was about approximately a 1 in 18,000 to 20,000 chance that Zechariah would be chosen to do this. And he was. So we have this picture of two people, very honorable, devout people, who are Zacharias and Elizabeth, following God's law, advanced in years, and yet surprisingly didn't have any children. The fact that they didn't have any children would have been so surprising to the original audience, because at this point in history, having children was seen as a blessing, and not being able to have children was seen as a curse. When falling pregnant with John, she states that the Lord has shown her favor and taken away her public disgrace among the people. In ancient Israel, fruitfulness was viewed as a primary sign of covenant blessing. Passages like Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 18, listed barrenness among the curses for disobedience. The society of the time often presumed that childless individuals were hidden sinners or lacked God's favor. So, being barren, you would be maybe a little bit not insecure, but you would know that people would be like, wow, that married couple they seem like holier than thou, but they're clearly, hidden sinners behind the curtain. So it would have been hard not to feel like shame, perhaps, or thinking people think that I'm doing bad things when I'm not. So the Catechism of the Catholic Church and Orthodox Church Fathers have commentary that emphasize the description given by Luke that Elizabeth and Zechariah were both righteous before God, blameless in their observance of all the Lord's commandments. So they weren't doing any nasty stuff behind behind the scenes and just pretending to be righteous. The church fathers emphasize what St. Luke said, that they were good as gold. They were good folks. And that Elizabeth's barrenness was not a curse for personal sin. The church fathers also note that Elizabeth follows in a long line of holy barren women in salvation history, such as Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Hannah, whose delayed childbearing was not actually a punishment, but a setup for miraculous intervention and miraculous, having their barrenness taken away in a time where it was not very likely or perhaps impossible, like in the case of Sarah, who was in her 90s, who was Abraham's wife, but we will talk about her a little bit later. So by allowing Elizabeth to reach an advanced age before conceiving, the birth of John the Baptist was marked as a supernatural gift from God rather than a routine biological event. Verse 8. So it was that while serving as a priest before God, before God in the order of his division, according to the custom of the priesthood, his lot fell to burn incense when he went into the temple of the Lord. And the whole magnitude of the people was praying outside at the hour of incense. Then an angel of the Lord appeared to him, standing on the right side of the altar of incense. And when Zacharias saw him, he was troubled, and fear fell upon him. But the angel said to him, Do not be afraid, Zacharias, for your prayer is heard, and your wife Elizabeth will bear you a son, and you shall call his name John. And you will have joy and gladness, and many will rejoice at his birth. For he will be great in the sight of the Lord, and shall drink neither wine nor strong drink. He will also be filled with the Holy Spirit, even from his mother's womb. Oh my gosh. And he will turn many of the children of Israel to the Lord their God. He will also go before him in the spirit and power of Elijah, to turn the hearts of the fathers to the children, and the disobedient to the wisdom of the just, to make ready a people prepared for the Lord. So the angel tells Zacharias that his prayer has been heard and that Elizabeth is going to have a son. And the angel says that he will come in the spirit and the power of Elijah. And what does this mean? In the prophecies, especially in Malachi, Elijah didn't die. It says he was taken up into heaven in a fiery chariot, and the belief was that Elijah would come back. And when Elijah came back, that would be the sign that God was returning. So Zacharias is told that his son will be the new Elijah, as has been predicted, and he will bring people to repentance. And he will be preparing a people for the Lord. So in the Old Testament, Yahweh made himself a people in the wilderness by bringing them out of Egypt into Exodus, in the book of Exodus. And now, in this New Testament, he's making a new people, and that is the task of St. John, making the new Exodus. Church fathers like St. John Chrysostom and St. Augustine emphasize that John the Baptist deliberately set up his ministry in the wilderness, as sort of a parallel to the Old Testament wilderness, Exodus. By drawing the people out of Jerusalem and into the desert to repent, John was staging a new exodus. He was reconstituting a faithful remnant, a prepared people ready to receive God in the flesh, Jesus Christ. So when the archangel Gabriel speaks to Zechariah in the temple, he paraphrases Malachi to show that John is the fulfillment of that prophecy. Gabriel says John will go before the Lord in the spirit and the power of Elijah. This isn't reincarnation. Both the Orthodox and the Catholic Church reject that idea. But John is the new Elijah, typologically and prophetically. Typological just means the study, classification, and interpretation of types, shared characteristics, or recurring patterns. Typological is something that's used a lot when understanding Christianity through the lens of the Old Testament. So Christ typologically fulfills a lot of Old Testament prophecies and things like that. John also shared Elijah's ascetic, like camel's hair and leather belt. They both lived in the wilderness, possessed prophetic boldness, and confronted corrupt rulers. Elijah fought King Ahab, and John with King Herod. Hence, he came in the spirit and the power of Elijah. So he's like a similar person to Elijah. He's the new Elijah. He's doing similar things that Elijah did. And that's why we have that parallel and that relatability between John the Baptist and Elijah. And yeah. So verse 18, and Zacharias said to the angel, how shall I know this? For I am an old man, and my wife is well advanced in years. So scholars look at the Greek text in Luke chapter 1 verse 7 and chapter 1 verse 18, which describes them as well stricken in years or advanced in days. The Orthodox patristic commentary and church fathers note that this exact Greek phrase, which I can't pronounce, I wish I could say perfectly in Greek, this Greek phrase, but it is a deliberate linguistic echo of the exact phrase in the Septuagint, which is the Greek Old Testament. It's the exact same wording and phrase to describe how old Abraham and Sarah were. And just a little bit of information on Abraham and Sarah, because it helps understand what's going on with Elizabeth and Zacharias. If we refresh our minds a little bit on Abraham and Sarah. So Abraham was the Old Testament patriarch chosen by God to become the father of the great nation of Israel. Old Testament Israel, not 1948 nation state of Israel. Originally named Abram, he demonstrated radical faith by leaving his homeland of Ur to travel to a promised land of Canaan. He did this at God's command. God made a sacred covenant with him, promising that his descendants would be as numerous as the stars, and that through his family all nations on earth would be blessed. Sarah was Abraham's wife and the matriarch of the Jewish people. Originally named Sarai, she remained barren into her old age, which seemed to make God's promise of a vast family impossible. However, she eventually received the miraculous grace to conceive and give birth to her only son, Isaac, when she was about 90 years old. The Bible, the old scriptures say, infer. Their son was named Isaac. Isaac's sons were named Esau and Jacob. Jacob's name was later changed by God to Israel. The name change occurs in Genesis 32 after Jacob spends an entire night wrestling with a mysterious divine being, often interpreted as an angel or a manifestation of God himself, like a pre-incarnate Christ, which is an interesting thing to imagine. A wrestling match, like Christ in a wrestling match, would be pretty cool to be a fly on the wall. So when the wrestling match ends at dawn between Jacob and this mysterious divine being, the entity blesses Jacob and declares, "Your name shall no longer be Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with humans and have prevailed." The name Jacob literally means heel catcher or supplanter, which reflected his early life of trickery, deceit, and manipulation, such as stealing his brother Esau's birthright and blessing. I know that's a lot of information. You don't really need to know right now more details, but so the name Israel redefines him as someone who wrestles honestly with God. It marks spiritual maturity, turning him from a deceptive runaway into a humbled servant who relies entirely on divine grace rather than his own cunning. Church fathers like St. Augustine saw Jacob's wrestling match and new name as a symbol of the Christian life. Jordan Peterson, whatever you think of him, he either wrote a book or taught a class called We Who Wrestle with God. And I haven't read the book or taken the class, but I imagine it is something about this idea that that St. Augustine wrote about, as it being a symbol for the Christian life, which it's funny to think about it like that, but it sort of is. They taught that Israel represents the spiritual seeker who undergoes trials, wrestles with temptation and prayer, and is ultimately wounded and blessed by God. Again, it's kind of strange to think of it like that, but at least in my experience, that is the Christian life. The Catholic Church views the name Israel as a title of perseverance, reminding the faithful that true blessing often comes through spiritual struggle. Emphasis on the struggle. So Israel was the father of 12 sons who became the ancestors of the 12 tribes of Israel, continuing the covenant line of Abraham that eventually led to King David and then Jesus Christ. So back to Sarah and Abraham, link to Elizabeth and Zacharias. So by linking with St. Luke, using a sort of linguistic way of linking Elizabeth and Zacharias to Abraham and Sarah, who bore Isaac in her old age. Patristic writers signal that Elizabeth's pregnancy was not just highly unlikely, but perhaps biologically impossible without a miracle, because she was past the age of childbearing. It is theorized that Sarah was in her 90s, and Bible scholars theorize that Zacharias and Elizabeth may have been in their 60s or 70s. So thank you for bearing with me through that little bit of history. Verse 19, the angel answered and said to him, I am Gabriel, who stands in the presence of God, and was sent to speak to you and bring you these glad tidings. But behold, you will be mute and not able to speak until the day that these things take place, because you did not believe my words, which will be fulfilled in their own time. So it sort of seems like a bit harsh that Gabriel gave him this sign of muteness. But we'll get into that. First of all, who is Gabriel? Gabriel identifies himself. Zacharias knew the Old Testament. Gabriel was in the Old Testament. He was in the book of Daniel, which Zacharias would have been familiar with. A little bit of a tangent, a little bit of a history on how Gabriel showed up in the book of Daniel. Just an interesting tangent that I will go on, despite if it's wanted or not. So in the book of Daniel, the archangel Gabriel appears twice to explain apocalyptic visions that leave the prophet Daniel terrified and confused. In his first appearance in Daniel chapter 8, Gabriel is commanded by a human voice over the river to help Daniel understand a vision about a ram and a goat that he had. He had this vision. And he didn't know what it meant, and it was very scary, and Daniel was very confused and scared. So Gabriel explains that the vision represents the future collapse of the Persian Empire to the Greeks, when Alexander the Great launched his invasion of the Persian Empire. The collapse of the Persian Empire to the Greeks was a massive turning point in the life of Daniel's people and the broader sweep of salvation history. Daniel's visions were given so he could help the Jewish people prepare for the upcoming era of intense religious persecution. Because while the Persians generally allowed the Jews to practice their faith in peace, the Greeks attempted to violently eradicate Judaism, defiling the temple and outlawing the Torah. So it's believed that Gabriel came to explain this vision and explain what it was prophesying was going to happen to the Jewish people, and what essentially did. So Gabriel didn't say it's what's going to happen to the Persian Empire in 334 BC, but he explained this is what's going to happen to the Jewish people. They're going to go through this persecution, and it did end up happening when Alexander the Great invaded the Achaemenid Persian Empire. And however, from a Catholic and patristic perspective, the Greek conquest of the Persian Empire was an act of divine providence that prepared the world for Jesus Christ by creating a global infrastructure for the gospel. So let's explain that a little bit. Through a policy called Hellenization, Alexander the Great established Koine Greek as the universal language of the known world. And this wouldn't have happened if Alexander the Great of Macedon didn't do this big thing and you know invade the Persian Empire. So through this policy, through this Alexander the Great of Hellenization and establishing Koine Greek as the universal language, everyone ended up speaking the same language essentially, which allowed Jewish scholars to translate, which down the line, years and years and years and years later, allowed Jewish scholars to translate the Hebrew scriptures into the Greek Septuagint, and this happened centuries before Christ. And this was basically allowed for theological vocabulary that removed global language barriers. So when the apostles began writing the New Testament and preaching, they didn't have to translate like Hebrew concepts into hundreds of different local dialects. They just used the universal language of Greek to spread the gospel message across multiple continents. So even though it was a horrible time of persecution for the Jews, Gabriel is telling Daniel that it's going to happen. And essentially, because it did happen, it set up the way for the gospel to be spread because of this global language, Greek, which wouldn't have happened without the invasion and collapse of the Persian Empire. I hope that makes sense. So in the context of Daniel chapter 8, verse 16, the human voice or voice of a man commanding the archangel Gabriel is understood by both Catholic and Orthodox patristic traditions to be the voice of God, the Son, the pre-incarnate Jesus Christ, which is pretty cool. It's always pretty cool when pre-incarnate Jesus Christ shows up in the Old Testament. This is how we see it as Christians. Obviously, Talmudic Jews don't view the Old Testament that way, but Christians, at least Orthodox and Catholic Christians, view it that way. So Gabriel is a high-ranking archangel. However, so Gabriel is a very high-ranking archangel, but this voice that speaks to him and tells him to explain the vision to Daniel speaks with absolute authority and issues an order to Gabriel to help Daniel understand the vision. No ordinary human or standard angel would be able to command an archangel like that, which is why the patristic tradition says it's pre-incarnate Christ. So earlier in Daniel chapter 8, verse 15, Daniel sees someone standing before him who has the appearance of a man. Patristic writers like St. Jerome and the later Eastern Fathers write that when a divine figure appears with human features or a human voice in the Old Testament, it is considered, this is the word I was thinking of earlier, a Christophany. We'll go with Christophany, a manifestation of the second person of the Holy Trinity before his actual birth in Bethlehem, which is just amazing to me. But I'm a bit of a Bible nerd, which doesn't mean I'm well versed in the Bible. It just means that I think it's really interesting and cool. So all of this to say, Zacharias knew who the Archangel Gabriel was. He had a good, strong reputation in the Old Testament, which Zacharias was familiar with. So I know I've almost gone an hour and a half, but I just want to get up to where I got up to with the actual class on Saturday, or the actual study on Saturday. And I think I'm not far away. So, verse 21, looking at verse 21, and the people waited for Zacharias and marveled that he lingered so long in the temple. But when he came out, he could not speak to them, and they perceived that he had seen a vision in the temple, for he beckoned to them and remained speechless. So, he was made mute, which seems harsh, but looking back at verse 20, we see that um, Zacharias did say, "How shall I know this?" But behold, you will be mute, and will not be able to speak until the day these things take place, because you did not believe my words, which will be fulfilled in their own time. So Zacharias said, like, he didn't understand. He said, he seemed to ask for a sign, because he said, "How shall I know this? My wife and I are so old," essentially, is what he sort of said. Um, he said this when a whole supernatural being of the highest rank was standing right in front of him. So kind of silly. Um, and if and the sign that he got, the muteness, the way I see it, like if an angel tells you your wife is going to have a baby and that you'll be mute from now until the baby arrives, and then you become mute, then up until the baby arrives, then it is very likely that the angel was telling the truth about who the baby was going to be. So I think that, and I'm not just thinking this on my own, I'm basing this off what the traditions interpret this to mean, that the muteness was so Zacharias would have a sign that what Gabriel said about who John the Baptist will be was true. And it's kind of funny. Like, it's kind of, I think the angels have like a sense of humor sometimes. I think, the whole divine heavenly host have a sense of humor sometimes. And I think sometimes when we think of humor in this life, like the humor that we have as people, like it just seems so good, so wholesome. And most good, wholesome, beautiful, and true things, if not all of them, originate with God. So it makes sense that he would have a sense of humor sometimes. And I think it was a good sign for Zacharias. Um, so nearly finished for today. Back to verse 21. And the people waited for Zacharias and marveled that he lingered so long in the temple. Actually, I think I am up to where I got up to with the class, but I'll just finish this. Back to verse, so. And the people waited for Zacharias and marveled that he lingered so long in the temple. So the people were all outside in the outer court of the temple when Zacharias was offering incense, and they were all worshipping and praying. And normally the priest goes into the temple to offer incense for maybe 10 minutes in this context. And Zacharias has been in there a while. So they're outside, waiting, wondering what's going on. They may be wondering if he's dead, because entering the holy place of the temple was actually dangerous. And I think that is where I will leave it for today, on a bit of a cliffhanger, because you may be wondering, you may already know, why it would be dangerous to enter the holy place of the temple. All right. sorry that went longer than the 60 minutes it was supposed to, but I'm really glad that I got that done. Sorry that the live stream didn't happen on Saturday when it was supposed to. YouTube wouldn't let me, and I did record the study on Saturday, but then the recording didn't work, which is all actually, I think, a providential blessing, because I was, as I said, so terribly nervous that I felt like I was going to black out, essentially, and I didn't black out, but I also don't think I delivered the information in a very entertaining way, because I was just nervous and reading my notes a lot. So hopefully I'll get better at this, and get better at yeah. But as G.K. Chesterton said, anything worth doing is worth doing badly. So I think this is worth doing, even if I do it badly. And I will end it there. 1 minute 30 seconds, 1 hour 30 minutes. So thank you for joining, watching, listening.